Brad Edwards, I hope you're having a great afternoon. Welcome back into the game in T-Town.
Thanks, Ryan. It's been an unusual week there, I would guess. Not used to having too many where you're coming off a loss.
No, and I think we're learning how to deal with it. But I'd love to get your reaction to the Iron Bowl. You talked about it last week, and you were all over this one. Maybe even a bigger whipping for the Auburn Tigers against the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, look, you got to give Auburn so much credit because they were clearly the better team. But on top of that, you have to recognize that Alabama just shot itself in the foot numerous times in ways that we're just not accustomed to seeing them do under Saban. I mean, Alabama is the team that has all the experience playing in big games. Granted, Auburn had been in one just 2 weeks earlier, but to see Alabama with so many guys who have played on the biggest stage, to go out there and just do the things that they did repeatedly, especially in the second half when the game was just truly on the line, just mental mistake after mental mistake, that was unusual. And look, as much as you may come away from it thinking, man, Auburn just took it to Alabama, you look at everything in context and it's like, wow, despite all of that, despite how well Auburn played, despite how many just unforced errors Alabama made, they still lost by 12 on the road against a really good team. And I think that's it's kind of hard to reconcile those two, but what it tells you is Alabama's still a really good team, even though they looked really bad on Saturday.
Well, Brad, and I want to spend a little time here. I think, and I've said this, and I'm not sure if I'm describing it the right way, but they lack some identity on the offensive side of the football. I don't know if they know who they were, who they want to be, who they are. I'm just kind of confused a little bit with the offensive direction.
Well, yeah, no, look, this is something that it's probably been discussed since the playoff last year. I mean, I guess when you're in the middle of competing for a national title, you don't take as much time to question everything. But we saw a lot of the same stuff out of the offense. Really, in the SEC championship game is where it started, and if it hadn't been for all the easy points set up by the defense, that game could have been very different. But certainly, what Washington and Clemson, two of the better defenses they faced all year, were able to do against that offense. It was kind of eye-opening. And, I think against the better defenses they played this year, it has been maybe struggle is not the right word for it, but there's been a noticeable difference when they've played good defensive teams in terms of just the lack of flow that there's been offensively. And I know a lot of people want to put it on Jalen Hurts. There were so many things that a bunch of players and coaches, I'm sure, all could have done much better. And so the fact that he played one of his worst games at Alabama, is putting him under the microscope. But there's a lot more to it than that. I think that the bigger question is, like you said, the identity. What do you want to be offensively? Because I think Hurts is taking too much criticism and too many people kind of making him out to be an average quarterback, and I think he's shown he's a lot better than average. The issue though is that when you build an offense around a guy like that with his skill set, what it does by nature is it creates a certain number of plays per game where no one other than him is going to touch the ball. And when you're loaded with great talent at both running back and receiver, it's tough to reconcile those two. I mean, he makes a lot of great plays as a runner. But every time you do that, you're preventing someone who's maybe a little bit more explosive from getting the ball in their hands. And you can't argue with success. I mean, they have in most of the games scored a lot of points with him at quarterback, but somehow you got to figure that out. Is that the way you want to go down the road? I know a lot of people are saying, oh, look, if they make the playoff, they got to go ahead and make some changes. You can't do that. It's too late. I mean, Hurts is your quarterback. If you were going to play the backup at all, you needed to have done that at A&M, at Mississippi State. You can't put a new guy in a situation where the season's on the line, like if they were to make the playoff. And so I think it's too late to worry about it this year, but certainly there is a trend over the last 2 seasons where there definitely are some questions that need to be answered offensively.
Let me go to the
And by the way, Ryan, before we move on, let me add one more thing, which is that the last 2 conference games, Auburn and Mississippi State had done such a good job converting on third down. Part of Alabama's offensive problem was that they didn't have enough plays, which basically kind of increases the importance of every play you do have when you have fewer of them to work with. And that's on the defense. That's not on anybody on offense. The defense has to get the ball back more quickly and give them the opportunity to run more plays on offense. And so it's both sides of the ball that are to blame for this.
Brad, let's set up the weekend. When you look at Auburn and Georgia, can the Tigers beat the Dogs again?
They can. Obviously, the change in venue is big. I think anybody who watched last weekend, even if you didn't watch the Auburn-Georgia game, it was a similar atmosphere. And I mean, it's tough for even the very best teams to go in and play a team in front of a crowd like that. And so the fact that it'll be more neutral, more 50-50 this week, I think will make a difference. Certainly, Georgia's had the chance to not only look at their previous game against Auburn and figure out the things that they did wrong, that they needed to do differently this time, but they had another chance to look at Auburn against Alabama. And so I think Georgia will be better prepared. And then obviously the health of Kerryon Johnson is a big deal because they don't have another running back who can do what he does. And so all of those things are factors, and I would be very surprised if Auburn won this game easily for a second time. I think everything kind of points to Georgia being in a spot where they should put up a much better fight, if not win the game. And in fact, I would almost lean toward favoring Georgia if Kerryon Johnson can't go, because I think he's that important to their offense. You could also say, look, Jarrett Stidham, he just played the game of his life. Can he come back a week later and play anywhere close to that well? I don't know, but yeah, there are a lot of reasons to like Georgia much more in this game than what they might have shown you based on their performance at Auburn 3 weeks ago.
Let me go to Oklahoma TCU, because obviously this game could really help out the Crimson Tide. When you look at TCU, what is the chance that they could pull off the upset and beat Oklahoma?
My gut instinct is that they don't have much of a chance at all because I watched the first game and it was lights out. I mean, it was just complete domination almost from the opening kickoff for Oklahoma. It was a no contest, and Oklahoma really took its foot off the gas in the second half. They could have made it look a lot worse. And the whole thing with TCU is they're supposed to be the best defense in the Big 12. And, you look at the stats and they back that up, that they're a notch above everyone else in that league, and yet they didn't come close to slowing down Oklahoma. So what confidence should I have that they're going to do it this time? I mean, sure, now they're not in Norman, they're on a neutral site, but I didn't see anything the first time to lead me to believe that TCU on either side of the ball has a chance here. But we've seen these things happen before in conference championship game rematches. We've seen the team that looked bad the first time win the second time, and there's a reason that Vegas only has Oklahoma favored by 7. I know our FPI has Oklahoma a 60% chance to win, which means they have a 40% chance to lose. My eye test says that it shouldn't be that close, but there's a reason that a whole lot of people aren't picking a blowout, which is that Oklahoma played really well the first time and TCU didn't, and you would expect that might change a little bit this time around. But you are right. This is maybe the biggest game of the weekend for Alabama's playoff chances, because I don't even think that there's a tough decision for the committee as to whether Alabama gets in if TCU knocks off Oklahoma.
All right, and let's go to Ohio State and Wisconsin here for a couple of minutes. Wisconsin continues to win. Will they continue to win on Saturday, from your opinion?
I've been talking about this game for about a month and a half, and my feeling has always been that this game would not even be close. That Ohio State is just so much better on defense than Wisconsin is on offense. Like I've considered there to be a pretty good likelihood that Wisconsin doesn't score in this game. But the more I've watched Ohio State and the more I've seen them struggle either for entire games like Iowa or at least at times versus other opponents. They're unpredictable. There are games where, like, you've seen times this year that lead you to believe, yeah, they could blow out Wisconsin. But then there are other times where you say, Wisconsin could win this game. And I think Wisconsin is getting better. And basically where I'm at is that I at this point don't assume Ohio State is going to win at all, much less in blowout fashion. I still favor them, but by no means do I think it's a lock that the Buckeyes win this game. I won't be surprised at all if Wisconsin wins.
All right, so in your opinion, we've already talked about TCU and Oklahoma. If TCU beats Oklahoma, that really sets up for the Crimson Tide. Let's play the scenario that even you said in the opening part of your answer right there. Let's say that Ohio State wins by a decent margin. Do they jump the Crimson Tide in your eyes?
Yeah, I think the bigger the margin they win by, the better their chance of jumping over Alabama. So if you're an Alabama fan, it's a tough situation because you want them to win, but you don't want them to win by too much. It's almost like you have money on the game at Wisconsin +6, where you
sure.
you want it to fall in that window. You don't want Wisconsin to win, but you don't want Ohio State to win by more than a touchdown. So that's kind of where you are, I think, from the Alabama perspective. There's a small window where this is a very good result for Alabama. Now, it is possible that it doesn't matter how much Ohio State wins by. What we don't know, and I think the people on the selection committee already know the answer to this right now, we're just not privy to this information, is how many people in that group, there's a committee of 13, how many of them have already decided, and actually maybe I should make that 12 because one of them is the Ohio State AD, so I think I know what his stance on this would be. But of the other 12, how many of them under no circumstances would consider putting Ohio State in the top 4, no matter what they do, because they have 2 losses and one of them is by 31 to a 7-5 team? There could be 8 people in the committee who already feel that way, and if there are 8, then Alabama's in great shape as long as Ohio State wins the game, no matter how much they win by. But if it's more, let's say 5 out of 13 that feel that way, then I think it ultimately could be decided by how impressive does Ohio State look. Now, as I say that, I think it's also important to point out there could be people in that committee who are also dead set against putting a team in the playoff that is not a conference champion and does not have a win over a top 10 team, which of course is Alabama's resume. So I see both resumes as polarizing to people in the committee. I think in any other season, no team with either the Alabama resume or the Ohio State resume would have even been considered for a playoff spot. It just happens that this is a year where they might be in a position where they have to take one of them, and it just becomes a lesser of two evils type of thing.
Where do you think Alabama will be tonight in that selection? Where do you think they'll be
ranked?
think
Alabama, I actually think the selection committee's top 8 will be the same as the AP poll. And maybe they'll switch it up just so they don't look like the AP poll, but I think Alabama will be 5 and Ohio State will be 8. And if I'm wrong, I think it'll tell us something about the way the committee's thinking. If Alabama stays in the top 4, it's obviously good news for Alabama. Maybe there are a few more people in the committee who have more, I don't know, love for them, whatever you want to call it. I think maybe the impression is different from what we're thinking if Alabama's still in the top 4. And that also goes the other way. If Alabama's behind Georgia, I think an easy decision is that Alabama is better than Georgia. If you just watch the two of them play Auburn, the last couple of weeks, that alone should tell you that Alabama's the better team. But if there are people who, despite that, still put Georgia ahead of Alabama, that's not good news for Alabama in terms of their chance of surviving, an Ohio State win in the Big Ten title game. And then I would also add that if Ohio State is higher than 8, if they're 7, maybe there's a little bit more love for the Buckeyes than we would expect given the nature of their losses. So that's what I would look for. If they're 5 and they're 8 tonight, then I think this thing is going to be too close to call if that's what it comes down to on Saturday night and Sunday morning. But if they're not 5 and 8, then I think it's probably going to tell us a little bit of in terms of which way it's likely to go.
Brad, do you think Alabama is one of the best 4 teams in college football?
I do. I think they're one of the 4 best. Do I think they're one of the 4 most deserving? No.
Okay.
Given it's not their fault that Florida State ended up being a mess. It's not their fault that the SEC didn't produce enough other quality teams for them to play. but that's the way it is. I mean, you could say the same thing about Wisconsin. It's not Wisconsin's fault that they played at BYU, and it just happened to be like the worst BYU team in 30 years. So there are a lot of things that are out of teams' hands regarding their schedules, but the question is what you did against that schedule. Does that make you deserving of being in the top 4? And I would say Alabama is not deserving based on its own resume. But if those results play out this weekend, and it's, you've got let's say, whoever ACC, SEC championship games, it doesn't matter. But let's say Oklahoma wins, then Ohio State wins. Do I think they're more deserving than Ohio State? Yeah, I do, because I think Ohio State's loss to Iowa is unforgivable. They're lucky that the committee won't eliminate them for the next 3 years based on that. It was so bad. But yeah, and so that's where I think we get this difference between 4 best, which the committee says, and 4 most deserving, which is what I think they're actually choosing. And I think the truth is there are probably only going to be 3 teams this year that deserve to be in the playoff, but you have to put a 4th in, and that's why Alabama and Ohio State would still be under consideration, even though to me, they are 2 of the 4 best teams. I just don't think either one of them really deserves to be in, but they might get lucky and get in anyway.
Brad, you got time for one more question here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I'm sorry, man. I'm just trying to pick your brain because you have understood, obviously, the way this thing works. Let me ask you, if Clemson and Miami, let's say Miami beats Clemson, is that a play-in game in your opinion, or can you criticize Miami's resume for losing the way they did to Pittsburgh?
Okay, so this is a good one because they're kind of the opposite of Alabama to me. Like I don't think Miami could beat Clemson by any amount of points that would convince me that Miami is one of the 4 best teams. You look at their body of work. They played 11 games because they lost 1 because of the hurricane, so they've only played 11. They've had 2 games where they looked very good. They were, both at home, both in prime time in front of a jacked-up crowd. The other 9 games, I mean, I'm not sure outside of those 2 games that they've even resembled a top 10 team. Some of those games they didn't even resemble a top 20 team. And to me, there is absolutely no way that Miami is one of the 4 best teams in college football. But if they beat Clemson and win the ACC with only 1 loss, do I think they're deserving of being in? Yes. Given what everyone else around the country has done with their opportunities, I think Miami would deserve to be in. So they are the flip side of Alabama in that respect. Now, could the committee still ask that question? Do we really think Miami is better than certain teams in other conferences? They could. I have a hard time seeing Miami, complete this run and be a 1-loss conference champ. Being a 1-loss Power 5 conference champ in a year where they're probably going to be at least 2 Power 5 conferences that have a champion with multiple losses, it's hard for me to believe that wouldn't get them in the playoffs. So I think they're in. I thought you were going to ask, what if Clemson loses? Could Clemson still have a case to get in? Because there are a lot of people who think that they would. My response to that, as well as Oklahoma still having a case if they lose the Big 12 championship game, is that I just think if you get to the point where you're putting 2 lost teams in that did not win their conference, then you just need to stop pretending that anyone even cares about conference titles at that point. I think Alabama has a shot, just like Ohio State had a shot last year as a 1-loss team. It didn't win its conference, but I have a really hard time believing anyone with 2 losses could get in without a conference title.
This is so crazy. Brad, what if they want to push the agenda past 4 teams to 6 to 8, and they put 2 SEC teams to sort of push that conversation forward?
Oh, so that's one of the many conspiracy theories that'll be out there. Okay,
yeah,
if
I'm the number 1 subscriber.
Okay, yeah. So if Alabama gets in, people will say that they're doing this because they want to anger everybody and move it up to 8 teams because whether it's the schools need the money or ESPN wants the money or whatever it is, that's what people will say. I can tell you this, just knowing what I know about the ratings business. If Alabama gets in, that is all the proof you need that ESPN has absolutely zero influence on this process. Because as much as ESPN loves Alabama, because Alabama rates really well on TV, if there are already 2 other Southern teams that are in the playoff field, the last thing that anyone would need for ratings, and I don't care if it's ESPN, Fox, whomever, if you're televising a game and you want a great rating nationally, what you don't need is two teams from the same part of the country. So while an Iron Bowl rematch might seem like the greatest thing in the world to a lot of people in the South, people out west, people up north, they don't care. They don't want to see that. ESPN would be a lot better off in terms of ratings if Ohio State gets in. Now, does that mean if Ohio State gets in that ESPN rigged it? I'm sure people will come with that conspiracy theory, which obviously has a lot of flaws, on its own. I think the biggest thing people are going to complain about is that a lot of people, I think, are just learning for the first time that the Ohio State athletic director is on the selection committee. Now, he's recused, which means he's not allowed to be in the room for any discussion or voting when Ohio State is on the board. But you could still make the argument, hey, look, he's been on that committee and been hanging out with these people all season long, and they are his friends. And so, if they were to put Ohio State in, can you say definitively that there's no way that their friendship with him, didn't influence that at all? I don't think you can say that. In fact, I think it's ridiculous that acting athletic directors are on this committee. It just creates too many scenarios where people could, at least come up with theories of impropriety. Even though I have more respect for the people in the committee than that, I can certainly understand why other people would suggest that there could be foul play.
Brad, you've nailed it today. I mean, I'm going to have to send you a slab of ribs or something. I mean, this is.
I'll take it.
Okay. You've knocked it out of the park. You've made us feel in a lot of different ways. I think a little easier on a Tuesday afternoon to travel throughout the afternoon. I think you've given us several scenarios. I see a lot of Horned Frog fans walking around Tuscaloosa, a lot of Miami fans. I mean, it's just so we appreciate it. Thank you so much for kind of relieving our stress a little bit, Brad Edwards.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, you're welcome. And like I said, I have no idea what's going to happen on Saturday. But I don't think that Alabama's chance is as desperate as it might have felt after the Iron Bowl ended a week earlier. So we'll see what happens. And you know what? I like their chances on a neutral field against anybody. That doesn't mean I think they would win if they get into the playoff. But there's not a dominant team out there, and that's why we're having all these discussions. It's because everyone has flaws, and I think it'll probably make for the most interesting playoff yet, no matter whether Alabama's in it or not. I don't think there is a clear favorite, regardless of which four teams there are, which should make it fun to watch.